sort out attendance for this event. First off, I'd like to, thank you so much. I'd like to welcome you all and start us off in a good way. And so I'm going to pass that on to First Nation Na-Cho Chief Hope to lead that. Thank you.
Thank you for coming, and I'm just going to open with a quick prayer. Thank you, Creator, for bringing us all here today, and help guide us as we listen and contribute and try to understand the impacts that we're having, and recognize the changes that we need to make to move forward in a good way, upholding the environment and keeping in mind future generations and their needs as well. Amen. Mussi.
So today we will be having our in-person session. We're planning on going from about 1 o'clock to 3:30 p.m. today. We have a number of people joining us online, and we will be recording these sessions and we will be publishing them after. So for those that have had conflicts in their schedules or couldn't make it today, we will be sharing this. And so stay tuned to our channels in what capacity that will be shared with. We will be ending today's session with a Q&A period, so we really welcome everyone's questions. Just please save them until the end. For those online, please throw them in the chat, and our team will flag them, and we'll ask them in the end. So I'd like to introduce today our team at the First Nation of Na-Cho My name is Sarah Frey. I'm a communications contractor that has been supporting the nation throughout the Eagle Gold Mine crisis. And we are fortunate here to be joined by Councillor Helaina Moses, Chief Hope, who many of you probably saw yesterday kind of bring down the house. We have Bill Slater from our technical team, and Mark O'Donoghue. And joining us online will be Mike Gordon, who was a former employee of Victoria Gold, and Farzad Mohamm, who is our water specialist, and Lisa Rear. All right.
So thank you for coming. I guess the Eagle Mine remains in a crisis. As you heard me start to talk about yesterday, we're going to be going into more details about those today. I guess the biggest thing is for us, we've had land claims signed since 1993, and upholding those and implementing those in the spirit and intent of how they were developed is of utmost importance to us. And it should not only be important to the First Nation of Na-Cho, but for all Yukoners on a whole, as our agreements were signed in the spirit and intent to look after the Yukon landscape for Yukoners on a whole. We have had contributions into that, but if it was our land claim, we would have signed our Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow in 1969, and it would have been done quick. Since the signing of land claims, the first 4 signed in 1993, and to date we have 11 of the 14 that signed. And we are all very individual. We have all very unique aspects to our own final agreements based on environmental, community, and our own cultural and background information that contributes to all those. So there's high importance that one area is not the same as another, and you can't just blanket any aspect across our whole the Yukon territory, let alone our traditional territories. We have special ecosystem areas within those too. Through our land claim, Oh, yes, thank you. So I guess just getting to understand our role before, during, and after the disaster. We have been a player in this for a very long time. I think the YESA actually started in, the YESA process actually started in 2010, I believe, hey, Bill?
Yes, it came into effect in 2005, late 2005.
But
Oh, for the Eagle Gold.
yeah.
About then.
Yeah.
9 or 10.
And it got bumped up to the XCOM level because of the extensive aspect of it. From the XCOM level, it stayed in that level for 2.5 years it took to get through that. Because of course there was questions back and forth of how things were going to look on the landscape, how those approvals would go through, what was assessed through the process we expected to see on the landscape, and somehow through that, that's not what we see on the landscape. What we see on the landscape today is not what was assessed through the ESSA process. Not sure how that happened, but that's just a fact of it. Although we have been participants along the way, contributing our aspects and comments about our culture, background, what we'd like to see without the land use plan in place already, there's a lot of work to do when there isn't a land use plan in place. I guess to start, this afternoon is just going to be it's not formal at all. We just want to have a good conversation. We want to be very honest about what is going on, how we contribute, and the challenges that we face on a day-to-day basis in trying to address what we have deemed an emergency, and I say that because Yukon government and Canada has not admitted that this is an emergency yet, and that poses challenges for us on its own aspect, because there are actually clauses within our FTA negotiation dollars that allow for more funding to come through emergency clauses. However, they have a list of exceptions, and this does not meet that. So we're spending our own FTA dollars to action this emergency when we should be able to declare an emergency and what that emergency is on our own. It's our traditional territory, it's our backyard, and we look after the land that way, so we should be able to have that kind of contribution. The problem is, a lot of the time, we end up being just a checkbox on YESAB's proposal. There's limited time for follow-up or accountability. Many times, our assessment people will get the application, and that box is checked off that says, have you talked to the First Nation? When the fact is, we're going, that's kind of funny because we haven't seen them, but it's checked off. We try to bring that up with Yukon government, and they just tell us that that's not their job. It's just their job to know that the proponent has stated that they have actually contacted the First Nation when, in fact, they haven't. Consistently, we're left out of conversations, we're left out of the planning, the decision-making, and even some of the desired outcomes. In this instance, we have hired experts within the first week of the failure, and it has been a fight back and forth for them to even listen to our experts as to what we would like to see, even try to make things better. We've kind of accepted that, and we knew that from the start, that because of the situation we're in, we were going to have to accept and move forward on choosing the least the least worst path forward, if I could say that. Because when you're not prepared for emergencies like that, you're always reacting. And when you're in a reactive mode, there's some things that you can't consider. You have to just do. And even if you find a month down the road, oh, well, we should have done this instead of that, you don't get that time to think in a reactionary situation when you're just trying to do the best you can to save what you can while you can, before it gets too worse. Unfortunately, that's where we're kind of at, is they've made it look like things have been taken care of, but it has not. And that is a part of why we're here today, is to share some of the things that are not exactly as you think they might be, or what you have been told. As you might know, our role actually since the failure is on trying to keep on top of the emergency. We've also had to constantly chase Yukon government and their media announcements and their updates with often with the truth of what was actually going on out there. And we continue to. Our consent is not being respected still to this day. They make decisions without us, and they will come and tell us what they've done after they've done it. The impacts didn't make headlines. 18-month look back. Mike Gordon was the gentleman who rode the dozer. He contacted me when he left site because he just wanted me to know how he was feeling, what his experience was, and he wanted me to know what was going on. I feel really bad for Mike, and it's a sad situation because he is struggling now, because through our compensation process, they're telling him that he is not qualified to receive WCB anymore. They're telling him that he does not have PTSD, and he's running out of avenues for being able to take care of himself that way, because when you take a job, you expect that they're going to take care of you, especially if there's an accident or anything like that, as they should. You should be taking care of your workers. You should really care for them. They are dedicating their life to you and your business, and we should be taking better care of them. I was appalled to hear Mike's story, and I still am, because his world is getting closed in more and more, and his story is getting buried. So that's why we wanted to offer him the opportunity to share his story today, because we hear no one got hurt on the job. But we don't believe that, because Mike did get injured, and he still carries that with him. So I would like to introduce you to Mike. He is online on the Zoom, and he is going to share his story with us today.
Hello, can you guys all hear me?
We can.
Okay, copy. Yeah, so I was on site. I was a Victoria Gold employee for almost 2 years. It would have been 2 years, September 9th, that the accident sort of happened. Kind of destroyed that a little bit. Yeah, Donna's very right. WCB has given me the complete runaround. After what happened, I had a really awesome lady from WCB that was going above and beyond. And we came up with a game plan. She said that it was completely fair, that it would probably not be a good idea for me to go back and operate heavy equipment again. Um, I already had some prior plans of starting my own business where I live here in British Columbia, just because that site was so unsafe. This was not the first time I was almost killed there. It was probably closer to the fourth or the fifth. Um, they were definitely a cowboy operation. Uh-oh. And I saw a lot of things that if you were on a different job site, for say, like in Northern Alberta, or somebody with a little bit stricter regulations, it would just, none of that stuff would have happened. WCB, I went back, I did everything that they asked me to. I upgraded school courses. I was doing everything that they asked. And then randomly one day, I got a phone call, and then that was the end of that. They said that I do not have PTSD. They called it an acute injury. Well, an acute injury, by their own definition, is a month long. We were already going on 6 or 8 months at this point. They tried to use the fact that my wife is a nurse, and here in British Columbia, nurses have fantastic benefits. So they tried to use saying that because I was going to physio prior to for a certain injury, that's what caused my injuries, was something that happened a year ago. They've given me the complete runaround. With the wife's benefits, now we are out of the ability, we've ran out of funds to be able to continue seeing a counselor. So now we're kind of on our own. I see a special doctor, luckily, for a referral to be able to deal with the pain that comes out of my neck and my shoulder. I have 3 ligaments that need to be reattached in my right shoulder and a bicep tendon that's out of groove. My C5 on my left side has a small chunk taken out of it, for a lack of a better term. So eventually I will have to have that disc replaced in my neck, which was from the accident. The accident itself that day was scary. This is probably the closest to death I've ever come in my entire life. I fell roughly 200 meters. The dozer landed on a 45, such a 45 that I couldn't get out on the right side. I could only get out on the left side. As I got out, I treated this as a backcountry sort of avalanche. And I've been backcountry snowmobiling for over 15 years here in the BC backcountry. So you try to treat it, you run across, you don't run up or you don't run down, you run across. And as I was running across to the forest, another mini slide came down. So then I had to backtrack. And luckily that I am in half decent shape, because I really do take care of myself. I don't drink, I don't do drugs. I do a lot of fitness in my spare time. And I ran straight uphill. I took a couple photos and videos that have been widely shared around the internet. So for Victoria Gold to say that there was nobody involved in the accident is a complete lie, because, well, the cell phone videos and photos that I have really beg to differ. I made it to the top, where I was taken down. I had a light medical check done over. And at this point, I knew I was going into shock. And I just wanted to call my wife. My mother was sitting in a hospital bed. She had a small piece of her stomach removed for personal matter. And by the time I was able to walk from the medical center to my room, they cut the internet off. So I had family members waiting at home that were only got a micro bit of the information, and I wasn't able to talk to them for several hours. It wasn't until somebody randomly told me that the phones weren't cut off in the manager's office. So there was no internet, and there was no cell phones inside the camp. Everything was cut off. There was no way to be able to communicate with the outside world for pretty much 8 to 10 hours, except for where the managers were. They had internet there, and they had landline phones working. So I snuck in there, and I was able to call my wife and call my mom, and it's been a nightmare ever since. Um, as I've talked with Dawna, and I've shown her photos of this, this isn't the first landslide that they've had up there. This is actually the second one. And the amount of rules and regulations that these people have been breaking since I've been working there. I can't even count anymore. I still have photos that I would love to share with anybody that would love them of just the absolute crap show that that place was. And it doesn't surprise me that they're going to fight with Dawna and they're going to fight with everybody along the lines to try and cover it up and hide their mess because they do not have accountability. They used to hand out this book up there by a guy named Jocko Willnick, who was a Navy SEAL platoon leader. And he has this really amazing book called Leadership Tactics and Strategies. And he talks in this book about how to hide the ego and put the ego away to be able to have accountability and ownership. And I always thought it was so funny that they handed this book out and tried to preach this, but they themselves could never preach that for the life of them. They themselves are a complete disaster. Their ego is so fragile. That's why they can't take any accountability or ownership, and they constantly just screw around people. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got to say about that. I really do appreciate your guys' time.
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for participating today, too. It's Bill's turn to take over.
Thanks, Chief Hope. Sarah introduced me earlier. I'm Bill Slater. I'm a consultant based here in Whitehorse, and I've worked for the First Nation of Na-Cho down on the Eagle Gold project since it initially entered the permitting stages, and in fact before that as well. I'm going to spend a bit of time. I guess this section of our discussion is about some of the impacts that maybe don't always make the news, and where we currently stand, what's the current status. So I'm going to start that, and there'll be some others on our team that'll participate as well. But I'll speak first. We're unfortunately missing our geotechnical expert. He's in a plane over the Pacific somewhere today. So Cord Hamilton, who is a missing member of our team today, but has been invaluable in his expertise. And many of you will have seen him in previous sessions and those kinds of things. So I'm going to talk about the heap stabilization and remediation, which is really Cord's area of expertise, but I'll do my best. And I guess following on Mike Gordon's story, which is it's the first time I've heard from him directly, and it's a tragic story, and I guess one of the important things to remember about this is that it was a tragedy, and it was an environmental disaster, and is an environmental disaster, but it could have been far worse. And the only thing between making it far worse and what we have was sheer luck. And the sheer luck was that this failure happened at shift change. If that had not been the case, there would have been multiple lives lost. And so we mustn't forget that it is luck that got us where we are. And so I guess I'll start in talking about the heap status and stabilization. And I've put up here two photos, one taken on October the 2nd, 2024, the other one taken on October the 2nd, 2025. The thing you'll notice about those is you can't see much difference. And that's because the heap stabilization has barely progressed. We're now 17 months in on this, and we're barely moving along on heap stabilization. But there has been some work done. And so what has been done is, I'll talk about phase 1A remediation here, and that started in August. So after 14 months, we actually got to some work to start looking at heap stabilization. And that was to relocate portions of the 1065 bench, which was the highest bench on the heap leach facility, to relocate the portions from the front of that bench near where the failure happened back into the back portion and try and remove some of that load from that failure scarp. 200,000 cubic meters of material relocated as part of that. And they're now working on phase 1B, which is continuing to move additional materials adjacent to the scarp from some of the other benches, moving about 800,000 cubic meters of material from those benches, again, back further onto the heap leach facility to reduce the load on those failure scarps. And the real purpose of that is so that we can create more stable conditions so we can even go and investigate the situation in the failure area. So at this stage, there has been no real investigation of the heap conditions in the failed zone because it has not been safe to go there. And the phase 1A and 1B work is aimed at creating conditions that will let us do that. We do know that no matter what, heap remediation will be complex, it will be challenging, and it's work that has barely begun. Also related to heap remediation, the recirculation of cyanide solution onto the heap finally ceased in June. So we were a year in, and we finally stopped recirculating solution onto that heap. That reduced, but it didn't stop the ongoing overflow of cyanide solution over the dam and into the Dublin Gulch Valley. So we lost a lot of cyanide solution in the initial failure and in the weeks that followed that, but the recirculation of solution onto that heap continued to contribute to the loss of cyanide solution for the next year. There was an angled well drilled into the in-heap pond at significant expense and challenge. It was commissioned in August of 2025. It is functioning, but it appears unable to pump at rates sufficient to drain the in-heap pond. And we can't get there to put additional wells in because it's not safe to get there yet, hence the angled well. So from our perspective, we still see and have seen stopping the overflow of heap solution into the Dublin Gulch Valley as a high priority. The photo here just of, and this is from the Independent Review Board report, of some of the materials actually out of the base of the heap that were swept into the valley as part of the failure, and I'll talk about some of that next. So there were two review reports done. The Independent Review Board appointed by Yukon government, who looked at the causes of the failure, and Delve Underground, who did some work for the Workers' Compensation Board, and that report was released publicly as well, looking at the causes of the failure. And so those two groups considered the condition of the heap, the liner, the solution collection systems. What we read in those reports is that equipment from the bottom of the in-heap pond was swept away in the failure. So not just over the top of the in-heap pond, but 15 meters down in that pond was swept away in the failure. The pumping systems were destroyed. We knew that on day one. Some of the investigations by those groups identified that there is flawed and substandard liner construction and operational practices that led to damage of critical liner components, especially the geosynthetic clay liner. And that has led to conditions where that component of the liner is weaker for stability purposes. And that is not affecting areas just under the failure, but in other areas of the heap, the extent of which we do not know. And the extent of liner and leach collection system damage caused by the failure, we also don't know at this stage. Confirming the integrity of that liner and leach collection system, especially in the in-heap pond, will be complex and costly. We're going to, if we have to investigate that liner in the in-heap pond, it has to be done. The only way to excavate that would leave leach material, leach ore sitting on a plastic liner on a slope above you. That has immense engineering challenges and huge safety and environmental risks that all have to be overcome. There is no precedent or roadmap for how to do that. And obviously that leaves us with the question of whether and how the heap can be repaired. That remains a substantial uncertainty in our view. So I'm going to leave the heap remediation topic for a moment and speak about cyanide solution and water management on the site over the past year. So there are several components to this. We have cyanide solution management, which of course was meant to be only managed within the heap leach facility and now is spread across the valley. And so with that, we have surface water collection, groundwater collection, storage, treatment. And then aside from that, there was always a need on this site to manage what we call mine contact water. So that's water that might be affected by waste rock or pits, other mine waste materials, and typically would not have cyanide in it, but would have metals, total suspended solids, those kinds of things. And there was obviously, when the failure occurred, mixing of those waters. So with respect to that water, there's a need to separate that water from the cyanide water as much as we can, collect it, convey it. Dublin Gulch, for instance, needs to convey through the site. Store water, treat water, so all of those things are necessary. And I'm not going to spend much time talking about mine contact water today, but there are some complexities there. And I've put up a map of the site here, unfortunately with north pointing to the left. So if you're used to north on the up, you'll be confused by this, I suspect. I only put this up because I wanted to point out really the ponds on the site, because those are the key water management infrastructure that we can see on surface. And so there's an events pond that's labeled there, and a control pond. Those are in the sort of lower left side of the photo. And those were the two ponds that were in place when the failure occurred, with the events pond being in place to store cyanide solution and the control pond to store mine contact water. Of course, when the failure occurred and all the ore and the solution washed into the valley, then the control pond very quickly became a pond that was also cyanide solution. Subsequent to that failure and subsequent to the receivership, there were 5 additional ponds constructed. And so you'll see in the lower right what we call Irosa Pond 2 and Irosa Pond 1. And then up in the Pit Pond Phase 1, 2, it was built in 2 phases, so we call it Pit Pond Phase 1, 2, or perhaps you want to call it Pit Pond half. Pit Pond Phase 3, adjacent to that, and the 1075 pond up on the waste rock dump. And you'll see that up in the center top of that photo. And those, of course, have all been important solution management components on the site. So let's talk about groundwater, cyanide, what I said, cyanide solution collection. Obviously, it's mixed cyanide solution in what was groundwater. Groundwater-related effects in Haggart Creek initially were observed in September of 2024. So but a few months after. In fact, we saw some effects before that, but they were more related to surface water. Collection of seepage near Haggart Creek began on October 21st, 2024 at what is called the W22 Seep 2. And there was some intermittent collection of groundwater at other locations through the winter of 2024 at some sumps and one particular groundwater well. And this groundwater well, it's worth noting, was the drinking water well for the site before the failure occurred. And when I arrived on site on July the 3rd, so that was now 10 days after the failure, 9 days after the failure, they had only just turned off that water supply well as the water supply well for drinking water in the camp. I do not understand to this day how management could have decided that that well sitting lower in that valley could be maintained as a drinking water supply for a camp of hundreds of people following that failure. So that well, among others, was other sumps was turned on intermittently during the winter of 2024. And as those things came online, we would see the conditions in Haggart Creek improve. And if they were turned off, we'd see them deteriorate. And Mark will talk about the effects in Haggart Creek a bit later. So the groundwater related effects in Haggart Creek basically continued to increase over the winter. Systematic groundwater collection, on the other hand, I mean, we had groundwater experts, and Yukon had groundwater experts involved in this early on, and by August, I think we knew where collection needed to occur to make sure that we didn't have effects in Haggard Creek. The wells were drilled because of safety reasons, not drilled until late in the fall of 2024. But those collection wells did not get on stream until May of 2025. That's when systematic groundwater collection started. So I just want to here highlight, when the ponds came online. So we had the events pond, the control pond, as I mentioned before the failure. IROSA 1 in September 14th, and you'll see that when IROSA 1 came on, when it came online, we were probably within a day of overtopping all collection systems. There was no space left. The pit ponds came on. Pit pond phase 1 and 2 came on in September and October of 2024, and IROSA 2 in October came online. The Pit Pond 3 and the 1075 pond were not finished until late April and late May of 2025. And that's important from the perspective of groundwater collection. So here we talk about, I want to talk a little bit about the interrelationships. Groundwater collection protects Haggard Creek. We know that. The collected water has to be stored and eventually treated. If you don't have effective treatment, which we didn't in the winter of 24-25, you have to store the water. So pond construction delays equal groundwater in Haggard Creek. And that's what Mark's going to talk about later. Unfortunately, of course, when you're sitting there in the winter, you don't know what's coming in the future. And you're wondering what's going to happen when freshet rolls around. Do you collect the cyanide solution that you know is going in Haggard Creek right now, the groundwater? Or do you save the space for cyanide solution that might come later? Or should you build more storage so you can do both? Or should you wait until the new fiscal year to spend the money on the new ponds because you didn't want to spend it in the last fiscal year? So I took the liberty of having a look at what would happen if we had collected, what would have happened if we had collected groundwater in the winter of 2024, winter of 24-25, which Na-Cho Nyäk was pushing for through that winter. And we were pushing for more construction of storage through that winter. And so the blue line on this graph represents the total storage we had available. And so you'll see it comes along and in December, it drops off dramatically, and I'll come to that in a moment. That's got to do with a pond that had a leak. But I assumed, okay, well, as you can see, around mid-September, we came very close. The purple line, the green line represents what was actually in storage. The purple line represents, well, if we actually did collect some groundwater, how much water would we have added to this storage? And what would have happened? How much water would we have spilled? And the numbers that I put in there, given what we now know about the amount of groundwater collection, are not unreasonable numbers and would probably have protected Haggard Creek through the winter of last year. So what you can see is, even with that, it looks like we might have had space. We certainly had space for some groundwater collection that we did not do. Now, we were lucky. We had a great freshet. There wasn't a lot of runoff. It happened slowly. So there were real advantages we had there. So, you can look at it in retrospect and say, sure, we had space. But Na-Cho Nyäk was arguing that we should use that space. We knew we were discharging water, and we were saving space for water we thought we might get later. So just briefly to talk about the discharge, and this slide lists, what water was discharged from the site. And so the first discharge happened to the IROSA Pond 2, which is a leaky pond. I'll talk about that again a little bit more in detail in a moment. So there was untreated cyanide solution discharged to that pond in as early as December of 2024. And subsequent to that, what I've called partially treated cyanide solution. So that is, it went through the treatment system, it it wasn't proven that it was non-toxic, but we know it was much better than, I mean, I was an advocate for at times putting treated cyanide water in Irosa Pond 2 before I knew it was leaking. But even afterwards, it was, as Chief Hope talked about, what is the best of a bad situation? So there was discharge of additional partially treated cyanide solution to Irosa 2. And then there was some discharge to a tributary of Eagle Creek, or of Haggart Creek, called Eagle Creek, and then discharge to Haggart Creek. And I've referenced there what I've called treated non-compliant cyanide solution. And I was careful in that wording, because it is treated solution. It was non-toxic. The test work said it was non-toxic, but it did not meet all of the effluent standards specified in the license. And you won't see any discharge here listed that says this discharge was treated and met all the standards. And I think that's accurate. Now, again, it's, was it the right thing to do given the situation? As Chief Hope spoke to, there are things we had to do that were not the greatest things that we would have preferred. And at the bottom of that slide, you'll see reference to discharge of untreated and treated mine contact water. And that's the non-cyanide solution that was mostly during freshet. So there was a program put in place and facilities put in place to separate that mine contact water and allow us to discharge that separately and not mix it with the cyanide water and add to that volume. That was a good addition. So just briefly on the Irosa 2 pond, the leaky pond. I see I forgot to change the number here. The previous slide on discharge, you'll see that there's about 130,000 cubic meters that was discharged to Irosa 2, which is the correct number. This says 50,000. So Irosa Pond 2 was identified as leaky in mid-December of 2024, shortly after it was put into use. So over the next few months, over 130,000 cubic meters of untreated and partially treated cyanide solution was discharged to the environment through the leaky pond. So basically the water was put in the pond, it was never pumped out, and it all disappeared. And so we assume it leaked out. It was not the magic pollution fairy that made it go away.
Oh, we wish it was.
Yes, we do. And so that pond is currently being repaired, which is a good thing. So just to wrap up on this, since late June of 2024, the First Nation of Na-Cho has advocated for rapid construction of storage, collection of surface and groundwater, and for water treatment. We knew those things were going to be necessary from day one. I went back to look at emails from our team on the 25th of June last year, and these things were referenced as immediately necessary. So we have been disappointed by what we think are some unnecessary delays in pond construction and therefore groundwater collection. And those have caused adverse effects. And those for us remain as critical priorities, especially now that there is storage on site, as long as it gets repaired, they remain as critical priorities in terms of collection of groundwater. So I'm going to pass this, I think, to Mark is next on our list to talk about. Oh, sorry, Farzad is next on our list to talk about water treatment. So, Farzad, I think you'll have to tell me when you want me to advance the slide.
Sure, I will. Hi, everyone. My name is Farzad Mohamm. I've had the privilege of helping Na-Cho in the past 4 years, specifically on the Eagle Gold project before and after the disaster. I'm a chemical engineer by background, and I have 15, 20 years experience in water treatment. So I guess I'll start by saying that today over $200 million have been spent And what we've managed to achieve is basically to reduce the leakage of the cyanide solution into the environment after the failure. And Bill mentioned that other than a few instances of surface water that made it to the creek, it's primarily been groundwater leakage into Haggard Creek. I guess the non-cyanide contact water, the way it's being treated now, and it's a temporary solution, is basically a container with some dosing pumps that dose in flocculant, and then we allow that flocculated solution to settle in a pond. Yes, that's a mistake there. I don't think that we ever sent. Bill mentioned that we didn't ever send that into Irosa Pond 2, but we sent that water into Eagle Creek, and then after that we send it to Irosa Pond 1, where we allow the solids to settle, and then that discharges into the creek. So this is it's water, that's not contacted with cyanide. It doesn't have cyanide, but this exists all around the site. It's contaminated primarily arsenic and cadmium, and normally it would have been treated in the water treatment plant, but now we preserve the water treatment plant to treat the cyanide contaminated water. So that's the temporary solution that's in place for treatment of the non-cyanide contact water. But for cyanide contact water or cyanide contaminated water, we have a very complex treatment process that was developed over the course of 4 or 5 months and implemented by BQ Water. There are cyanide experts that were engaged after the failure. So that process that I will talk in a minute about it treats the water, as Bill mentioned. The water is not acutely toxic. That's important to mention, because it still causes chronic toxicity because it's elevated in a handful of species that report into Haggard Creek. But we're treating and we're generating non-acutely toxic water that can be discharged into the Haggard Creek. Otherwise, the situation would have been a disaster. Can we move to the next slide, Bill, please? Yes, so here we talk about the process that pretty much entirely was implemented after the failure, because before the failure, there was no means of treating cyanide, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what we're doing now is we're doing cyanide destruction upstream, and then we go into the existing water treatment plant, the water treatment plant that was in place before the failure, but could not treat cyanide. It basically treated water to remove metals, the non-cyanide contact water. So we go in there, we remove the metals, and then after that, we brought on site a whole set of reverse osmosis trailers. This is like the gold-plated treatment process, and expensive, of course. And we go through the reverse osmosis, and normally you would drink the water that comes out of reverse osmosis. It's that clean, but not in this case, because we're dealing with cyanide. It's sneaky. It goes through everything, including reverse osmosis. And after the reverse osmosis, we have to do another round of cyanide destruction. Again, after that, we have to do another round of metals removal. And each one of these, we ended up building a pond, a 5,000, 6,000 meter cube pond, to be able to do those. And then after that, we remineralize the water, some final polishing treatment, and then it goes into Haggard Creek. So it took about 5, 6 months to develop and implement and debottleneck and bring all of the equipment to site, because basically none of this existed there. Testing and upgrading and name it, and winterizing, because by this time we were in winter, and even to test the process, they needed to make sure that the plant operates. So you can imagine what the team has gone through. And then we started discharging in February of 2025. And when I say discharging, again, this is water that does not meet the standard limits, but it is non-acutely toxic. I guess to this date, we've discharged more than 1 million cubic meters of cyanide contaminated water. A lot more to come. Bill, can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, approximately more than 1 million meter cube of water was treated, and we are frequently elevated in cobalt and nitrites, as well as sometimes cobalt, copper, and nickel, and it causes chronic toxicity in the Haggard Creek. We can, however, improve the quality of the water that is being discharged. And BQE has tested a process at the bench scale at site on real water that comes out of the RO. It's a slam dunk process. It works nicely for the temporary treatment, but it's pending funding. And Na-Cho, of course, we're pushing hard to get it implemented for the spring freshet. But that means that the decision and the funding has to become available now. Otherwise, we're still going to continue discharging this chronically toxic water into the Haggard Creek. The slide says the plant is scheduled. The plant is shut down as of now, as of mid-November, and they're doing the winterization of the plant to make sure that they're able to restart it for the freshet. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so as I mentioned, I was involved with the project before the failure happened, and I was never happy with what was going on. Bill and I mean, Bill called me initially and was like, hey, we're going to have a problem with cyanide with this mine. And we wrote many memos and participated in a number of meetings and raised serious concerns about the fact that there is no cyanide treatment available despite the permit requirements, and the fact that the plan that Victoria Gold had put forward, I still call it the Mickey Mouse plan to this date. And I'd say it was basically one Excel sheet worth of a plant. That's not what I call a plan. And that was supposed to take care of cyanide. That was basically to check a box. And I read very involved memos going back to the basics of physics and chemistry and mentioning that this is not going to work. And it didn't work, of course, because there was nothing available to work. But the mine proceeded without any proof of performance. And then after the failure, imagine if we were able to destroy cyanide right after the failure, we would be in a much better position. I mean, all of these concerns. But it took us, it took us 2 months to be able to talk about what needs to be done. And then after the receivership happened, it took us another 5 to 6 months to figure out what we need to do and how to do it and, bring the equipment and put together the team and all of that. Kudos to BQE. So let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so how NND has been involved. We were at the site, I believe 3 days after the failure. And I remember speaking to the remaining Victoria Gold staff who were actually very, the few technical folks that I spoke to, they were very receiving of recommendations. My recommendation at the time was to dose oxidant into the water, in the ponds, to just kill cyanide as quickly as we can. Took a while for that to be adopted, and then it was the very, very minor dosing because I don't know why. I don't want to guess why, but killing cyanide at the same time could mean losing gold. So I guess it was very early on. After the receivership happened and we couldn't work it out with the previous company, we actually engaged BQ Water. We have a very good relationship with them. They're cyanide experts, and they brought to the table a very strong operating team. And we've been working very closely with them, including conducting on-site testing and evaluating and processes. They've been very open and We've been comfortable throughout this process. We've been the advocates of in-pond cyanide treatment, as I mentioned, since the beginning and throughout the process. And thankfully, regretfully, it wasn't adopted earlier, but thankfully it was adopted lately. And now the overall inventory of cyanide that exists on site has significantly dropped in these ponds because it's being dosed with sodium bisulfite, which is an oxidant that kills cyanide in the ponds, not to the extent that you would be able to discharge that water, because when you destroy cyanide, you generate ammonia. So it's basically you're changing Peter per pad, but pad is a lot less toxic than Peter, but you still cannot discharge that water. It requires the whole 9 years of treatment. We actually performed a study to identify what the treatment requirements are for the site at this point after this disaster, and basically came up with that, and that formed the basis of the RFP for the long-term treatment, which now has a winner, and they're conducting the preliminary stages of the design of the long-term water treatment, which would be able to generate water that would meet the permit requirements. And I guess the last item, we've also engaged, we were advocates and we pushed really hard to engage the biological treatment in situ. Again, this is an in-pond treatment. You basically dose the ponds with sugars and allow the bacteria to chew on cyanide and destroy cyanide. And the importance of this is that this has been part of the original plan for the closure of the mine and the detoxification of the heap. And who knows which direction this thing is going. And we need to figure out how quickly this can be remediated. And this is a critical step in understanding what needs to be done going forward. I believe this is the last slide, or maybe I have one more. Yeah. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, I think Mark, you're next one up.
Yep. Yeah, thanks, Farzad. Hi, my name is Mark O'Donoghue. I'm a biologist who works with First Nation on downstream effects. I'm based in Mayo. So I'm going to give you a real whirlwind summary of the monitoring programs we've been looking at for downstream effects, some of the preliminary findings, and also some of the questions that remain. We don't have tons of time, so it's going to be a real overview. So within a few days of the slide, as others have mentioned, NAD really took the lead in organizing technical teams out of multi-agency staff to really get together the best people to try and figure out what effects we're seeing and coming up with plans to monitor and assess them. And Lisa, who follows me, is going to talk about these technical teams in more detail, so I'm not going to describe them further. I'm just going to go over some of our main monitoring programs that we've been doing. And when I talk about downstream effects, just to remind you, the Eagle Gold Mine is in Upper Haggart Creek, which is about 27 kilometers from the South McQuestion River, down to the McQuestion River, and then flowing into the Stewart River. So water quality was one of the first things that we really put our mind to monitoring. We worked with Environment Yukon to come up with a plan for monitoring water at a number of sites. This is the Haggart Creek watershed, and all the little dots there are water monitoring stations. And these were stations that had been used before in monitoring the mine while it was operating. There are a lot more of them in the mine area in the north there, and then flowing, there's others as you go down Haggart Creek there. And there are even some monitoring stations that are off this map that Trundaquichin are monitoring in the lower McQuestion River. But the monitoring after the disaster there has been much more intense than when the mine was actually operating. And in this talk, I'm going to show you just a couple of the results of downstream effects of water quality And I'll have them for three spots. One is for up by the mine, just right where the effluent of the mine comes out. Secondly, will be at about halfway down there where there's a major tributary, Lynx Creek, that comes in there, and then a third station right down near the South McQuestion River. So I'll start with cyanide. So cyanide is one of the contaminants of the most concern. It's used by the mine to leach gold out of the ore, and it's also highly toxic to aquatic life. So this graph here, Bill and Farzad have talked about these results, shows cyanide in the Haggard Creek at those three different spots that I just talked about, from starting in July, right after the heap leach pad failure, right up till the beginning of this month. And the gray dots on there are from the station that is right below the mine. The red dots are about 7 kilometers down from the mine, and the green dots are from right down near Haggard Creek. And that solid line across the graph, that represents the level of cyanide at which you start seeing chronic effects on aquatic life. So in other words, growth, reproduction, and the dashed line across there is where you start seeing lethal effects on aquatic life. So looking across right after the heap leach pad failure, we saw that spike in cyanide. That was from a release of partially treated water that turned out to be high in cyanide. So that's when that fish kill occurred that you've heard about in the news. Then levels of cyanide rose during the fall. They stayed up above the levels where you start seeing some toxic effects for the whole winter. And there was a few spikes in there as well. And those were due to discharge of some completely treated water and also some breaks in pipes. So there was a few spikes in cyanide. Since then, the levels of cyanide have gone down to very low levels in the last few months here. And you'll see, the highest effects are closest to the mine, and as you get further away, there's some dilution there. The decline in cyanide is due to a few things over the summer. The water treatment plant really got things together as far as figuring out how to treat the water, as has been mentioned. And also there was some wells drilled to intercept contaminated groundwater. So that took care of the two main sources of cyanide. There was many of the contaminants actually saw a big decline over the summer as water treatment got things figured out and groundwater was intercepted. There's a few that have been more troublesome. Cobalt, as Bill mentioned earlier, or Farzad actually mentioned, has remained difficult to treat. It rose rapidly in the fall last year and has stayed high since then above the water quality objectives, which is that line across there. And there's a couple of other ones like nitrates also that have caused some trouble. So that's, we could show these graphs endlessly, but I'll make a couple of points there. The one thing that's really important is that the water treatment has improved to the point, and all those works that Bill summarized, the ponds, the wells, the movement of water on site, they've all resulted in the fact that we've been able to avoid an absolutely catastrophic surface water release of cyanide on site. All our best models show that had there been a big surface cyanide release, it basically would have killed everything all the way down to the South McQuestion River. So we really averted a disaster, and that's an important success that this was able to be achieved. It came at a real cost. I mean, it's over $200 million basically to have contained most of the negative effects to date on the Haggard Creek. So that's the first point I wanted to make. The second point is that we know that levels of several toxins, cyanide, cobalt, and a bunch of other ones, were at toxic levels in Haggard Creek for all of last winter. We don't know yet the damage that was done. So that's some of the other monitoring I'm going to talk about. So we've learned a lot about water quality from all this monitoring. There's also a lot of questions. So over this coming winter, we know that groundwater is going to be the main source of contaminants into this creek because the water treatment plant is turned off and surface waters will be mostly frozen. We don't know whether it's possible to intercept enough groundwater to avoid last winter's toxic conditions. We don't know how much contaminated groundwater escaped from the initial slide or a subsequent flow. We know a lot did. It's in the hundreds of thousands of cubic meters at least. We don't know, we're not sure where it all went. There's a lot of questions about groundwater movement. Lastly, our water chemistry analyses show that it's very likely that a lot of cyanide is actually settling out into the sediments as it's moving down the Haggard Creek or the Dublin Creek Valley. We don't know how much, we don't know in what form, and we don't know how stable that is. So will this represent a pool that's going to be there for decades? Is it something that's going to be very stable? There's still lots of questions. And these questions are important because they represent the, you know, what are the risks? What don't we know? Quickly, going on, so fish are especially susceptible to cyanide, so we spent a lot of time developing a fish monitoring program. We've been working with the DFO and Yukon Environment on this sampling. This is a map of the Haggard Creek watershed. All those dots are where fish are being monitored, both in the Haggard Creek main stem below the mine, where we maybe see effects of the mine, and elsewhere. This is just getting going. So we have had 2 years of monitoring. Last year's monitoring gave us a failure look because the groundwater hadn't reached the creek yet. This year's is our first year that we're looking at it since the failure, and we just got those information in. So we don't know yet whether there's been an effect on the fish. It's not just fish in the creek. We've been looking at the whole food web, so the effects of contaminants on aquatic insects, algae, and sediments. And then DFO has been putting a lot of time into figuring out where the salmon are using in the system as well. So it's a lot of work going on about fish. As with the water quality, there's lots of questions. Like I said, we know that some of the contaminants were at toxic levels in the creek. We don't know yet what the actual effects were on fish and the rest of the aquatic food web. Also, you know, Haggard Creek, the only effect on Haggard Creek isn't the mine. There's lots of placer mining. There's also been a lot of forest fires in recent years, and there's big permafrost slumps of going into the creek right now. And so we don't know what the cumulative effects on this creek are going to be. There's a lot of concern about how far this contamination is going to spread. Is it going to represent a health risk for people? So we've been doing monitoring to give us information about contaminants in fish and about the bugs in the creek that they eat. Also in moose, caribou, and some aquatic mammals downriver. So this is just getting going. One little piece we do have in, which is on the good news side, I guess, is that mercury, which is a contaminant of lots of concern usually. That's the fish in the creek are represented by those blue and red lines on the bottom there, and that line across the top is where there are health concerns. So right now, baseline levels starting, we don't have an issue with mercury in the creek. The slide will, heap leach failure will mobilize some new mercury. So we'll see, we'll keep track of where that's headed. And I'm gonna finish with this slide. So South McQuestion River, Haggard Creek has been known for generations as really valuable grayling run and really valuable moose habitat in particular. In the spring every year, there's literally thousands, sometimes maybe over 10,000 grayling that congregate where Haggard Creek runs into the South McQuestion River. This is for pre-spawning. They congregate there mostly. That's thought most of them actually spawn in the river, and then when the creek melts out, the grayling migrate up these creeks and spend the summer in there because it's good thermal refuge during the summertime. And then they migrate out in the fall. This has been this is the most important grayling fishery that exists for First Nations people there. There's dozens of people who go there together, and it's not only an important food source, it's also a time when elders and adults and youth can get together, and there's a passing on of stories and a passing on of knowledge. And this has become especially important with salmon harvests closed down. There are no more fish camps right now, so that opportunity is lost, and this was a really important fishery. So I guess this is one of the things that has made this this whole slide so difficult. The effects of the slide so difficult that in First Nation culture, animals, plants, the water, the land, and animals, they're not all separate. They're part of the same interconnected whole, and there is an obligation for people to take care of the land. And this contamination has been taken very deeply, very personally, lots of anger, lots of frustration. Because for lots of people, this area, this part of the traditional territory is gone now. And and that opportunity to pass on knowledge is gone. And so, I've sat here and talked about all the science that we're using to monitor effects on the ecosystem, and that's really important. But this is an effect that's already happening. This is an effect that's happened. This loss of this part of the traditional territory, and it's hard to overexpress the importance of that. There's been lots of effects on the First Nation. The capacity to actually deal with this has meant ignoring lots of other priorities. But I think this loss of this grayling run and this part of the traditional territory, there was no spring fishery this year. Hunters avoided this area, going to this area, just because people feel it's toxic now. That's just huge. So I'd like to pass this over to Lisa, who's going to come in remotely to talk a little bit more about the technical teams and how they worked.
Thanks, Mark. Is the slide up?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Rear. I am a citizen of Na-Cho and an aquatics biologist. I'm speaking to you now from Mayo, from Na-Cho traditional territory. So my work this last year on the heap leach failure has been primarily on the effects of the failure to downstream fisheries and aquatic science. And as Mark just presented, NND basically initiated the creation of these technical working groups meant to focus our government agencies on delivering monitoring programs that could provide coverage and therefore protection of the receiving environment downstream of Eagle Gold. So the poster that you're seeing now visually outlines the work that went into creating these programs and what came out of it. And I really wanted to show what I felt were positive aspects that had come out of an otherwise very depressing story that perhaps hadn't been told. Positives such as the leadership that NND provided to progress these programs, open data sharing, and perhaps even the beginnings of a collaborative approach. I also wanted to communicate how NND was able to incorporate some of our ways of knowing into the programs and show that Indigenous knowledge is not always just a fact tied to a time and place, but it's also a way of thinking and approaching problems. So to introduce this a bit more and try and express how devastating the heap leach facility failure was to NND, I thought it was important to remind ourselves how NND views the waters on traditional territory. On June 21st, 2024, NND hosted a water ceremony. As part of this ceremony, the nation drummed and sang songs to bless the water. At this gathering, our citizens were reminded that the rivers and watersheds are like our matriarchs, like our mothers, strong, intact, and alive. And when one of the matriarch is lost or hurt, the entire family suffers. Because rivers, like our family relationships, are all connected. Our well-being, our cultural, spiritual, and mental health are dependent on clean water. Water is sacred and must be cared for. Because without mothers and water, we would not exist. This was spoken on June 21st. 3 days later, the heap leach facility failed, spilling cyanide-soaked ore and toxic solution into Dublin Gulch, which flowed into Haggart Creek, home to grayling and whitefish. This resulted in fish kills in the creek, with the solution eventually being detected in the South McQuestion River, spawning grounds of our culturally significant Chinook salmon. This was our worst fears realized. The waters, our matriarch, poisoned, fish killed. The failure forced the closure of a subsistence fishery used for decades by NND. The cultural severance was immediate and devastating. Trust in the safety of the water and fish disappeared. In the weeks post-failure, emergency monitoring work was triaged to focus on water quality nearest the site and the beginnings of a fish population survey at Haggart Creek. But there remained a gap in emergency response planning that would address the larger receiving environment, the bigger picture with water, fish, wildlife, and people. And we had so many questions. How far would the cyanide reach if the storage ponds failed? Which agency was sampling the insects in the stream? Were grayling that swim in Haggart Creek safe to eat? What about moose that use this range? And what about the salmon traveling up the Yukon River towards Haggart Creek as all this was happening? Who is monitoring what, and were we monitoring the right things? To address these questions, NND followed Indigenous governance values by mandating and facilitating collaboration between government agencies. NND created the technical working groups whose purpose was to gather all affected parties along with their technical knowledge and resources and collectively come up with the best options for monitoring the receiving environment, options that would include NND's voice. The technical groups included multiple government departments at the federal and territorial level, technical consultants supporting YG, the receiver and proponent. It included our neighboring First Nation of Trondeck-Gwitchin and the Yukon First Nation Salmon Stewardship Alliance, as well as university research partners at Carleton and Queen's. This collaborative approach aligns with traditional law that instructs us to cooperate in governance, share information, and strive for consensus when solving problems. It acknowledged that we all had a stake in this, we all had information to contribute, different methods to try, and values to teach. NND also wanted to ensure a holistic worldview is represented for the receiving environment, and so encouraged broadening the spatial extent of monitoring from the smaller localized area to the whole watershed level, eventually covering the waters all the way down to the Stewart River. NND also requested additional monitoring to assess more trophic levels and species, knowing that damage to one ecosystem level can affect another, as they're all interconnected. And so these programs covered water quality to fisheries, bugs and algae in the stream sediment, as well as tissue monitoring for contaminants, moose and caribou, and a human health risk assessment. And so what came out of these working groups were multiple biological and physicochemical monitoring programs covering the receiving environment that were either newly created or freshly updated, reviewed and edited by all parties, and implemented on the ground in teams, often made up of a mix of technical workers from NND lands and the federal and territorial departments. Also highlighted here is the open data sharing and communication that was prioritized by our working groups. All parties had access to the study designs and data as it was generated. Communications and meetings were generally open, and the information was transferred to NND governance and to the emergency website for its citizens. This was an effort to create trust between government departments, but also trust for our community members. Recognizing the social and community impacts from this failure has been ongoing. Trust in the industry, of course, has been impacted for many, but of significance is the loss of cultural food sources and on-the-land activities that's occurred with the loss of our annual grayling harvest at Haggart Creek. This was an event that NND organized every year at the creek confluence into South McQuestion, where elders and parents and children could gather to harvest traditional food sources and pass on knowledge to our youth. This harvest has been canceled since the failure, along with many moose hunts and the knowledge transmission that would have taken place in this area. Although there's been no evidence yet of site contaminants reaching people, NND continues to feel a cultural severance from the Haggart Creek watershed and likely will for years to come. This is an area of our traditional territory that we can't go. These are direct socioeconomic impacts from this mine being carried forward in real time by First Nations. NND seeks to understand the cumulative impacts to these watersheds and to its people. Working on this disaster has not been easy for NND's technical team, but for those of us working with these downstream groups, it has often felt like a positive light in otherwise dark times, knowing that NND has been able to advance and inform nearly all downstream monitoring programs born out of this disaster and do it in a way that aligns with traditional values. Being able to design the programs and implement them together with other governments while sharing resources shows us what a consensus-based collaboration could look like. Programs that are co-developed with the Indigenous government versus just Indigenous informed, a checkbox. It reminds us that this approach of co-management was one of the intents of our modern-day treaties, that the Indigenous and Crown governments could work together to care for shared land. For those of us monitoring the downstream receiving environment, I feel like this is possible and should continue to be a goal for Crown governments and proponents of the future. Mussi Cho.
I think we're moving to
Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, Helaina, do you have anything to say? And then do you want Helaina to speak before me on the systemic stuff? Or?
It's up to you, Helaina. The systemic issues. We'll let you start, kick us off,
Okay.
Bill, and Helaina, you just jump in when.
Yeah.
Thanks, and thanks, Lisa. That was excellent and moving, and appreciate your perspectives and hearing them directly in that way. I'm going to talk a little bit in not such a moving way, I'm sure, about the failures that kind of occurred on this, that did occur on this project before the actual failure. What were the issues that contributed perhaps to this crisis? So, did we have a responsible company operating here? Were they regulated by a responsible government and regulator? Was there a responsible industry that they were part of? How did this all contribute to this failure? And before I get into that, I think it's important for us to look a bit at, the causes that contributed to the failure physically. And so I've put up here a schematic of a heap leach facility similar to the Eagle Gold facility, just for those that don't know these types of things. So we see at the bottom there what I've called a dam. It's referred to as an embankment in some cases. That's kind of the keystone for this heap leach facility that's stacked up the valley. And behind that dam is a plastic lined facility. The liner goes up over the upstream face of the dam and then on up into the valley where that heap leach facility was placed. And the ore is on top of that liner. There's cyanide solution irrigated onto the top of that ore. It percolates down through the ore and picks up gold as it moves down through there. And that is collected in a leachate collection system that's on the surface of the liner. So that's made up of pipes pipes that are perforated that are meant to collect that solution, and those are contained in a relatively coarse kind of gravel material that allows the solution to flow into those pipes. And once it collects then in behind the dam, then you can pump it off to the facility where the gold is recovered. So that's the facility we're meant to be working with. So as I mentioned earlier, there was an independent review board who made a lot of effort to look at what were the causes of this failure. And there's a report I'm sure many of you have seen in which they describe their findings and conclusions and some recommendations. In that report, they identified 5 primary causes of the failure. So they identify that, these kinds of catastrophic failures typically don't occur from one single cause, but they're a combination of causes that all intersect to result in something of this scale. So the 5 primary causes, I'm going to just cover them briefly. The first one was placement of low permeability ore, including on the 975 lift. And so I've marked that on the slide there schematically. There was also low permeability ore in other lifts, 955, 965, 985, and possibly other places. The design for this facility was based on high permeability ore that would allow this leach solution to move through it and collect in the solution collection system. The operations didn't deliver that kind of ore, as it turned out, at least in some places. The second contributing factor was impairment of the leach solution collection system. So that is the pipes the pipes and the granular material along the surface of the liner, along the surface of the plastic, where the solution was meant to collect and be conveyed down into the in-heat pond area down behind the dam. So when the construction was done, there was no mechanical connection between the lateral collection pipes and the main lines. They were simply butted up against each other in the hope that the leach solution would flow through the gravel and into the main collection lines. Apparently something that is sometimes done, but there were some challenges in how it was done here as well. Also, the drainage material turned out to be more sandy than planned, and that material plugged the perforations in the pipes. And so that meant that this leach solution collection system didn't work as well as it should have. And I've put this photo up here. This again is from the Independent Review Board's report, and you can see the water accumulated there between the heap leach facility and the liner. And so if you can picture, that liner there is sloping uphill to the right. And so that is ponded between the ore and the liner. In that location should be the coarse material with the leach collection system. That water shouldn't be sitting there. It should be immediately conveyed down to the bottom of the heap leach facility. That isn't what was happening. The third contributing factor on this failure was an oversteepened slope on the face of the heap leach facility. The design did not include access ramps for trucks up the face of the facility, but during construction they decided to put those ramps in. And that meant that there was a steep slope that ran between those ramps. The overall slope of the, unconnected to the ramps, the overall slope of the facility was supposed to be 19.7 degrees as a maximum. It was actually overall 22.5 degrees. So somewhat steeper than was designed. But between the ramps, there was a slope, essentially angle of repose, 36.5 degrees between these access ramps, in places up to 35 meters high. And just for reference, the benches on this heap leach facility were initially 10 meters and then advanced to 12 meters as well. So we're now talking about something that's 3 benches high as a single angle of repose slope. And this is also above the layer of above and within the layer of low permeability ore. So the fourth contributing factor, water accumulation above that 975 lift, the low permeability ore. There was aggressive irrigation in the spring and summer of 2024. It caused a perched water table above that lift. So now we've got the water, which would typically at the back end of there be flowing down through the leach collection system. It's not flowing through as it should. We're aggressively leaching more benches than we have in any previous year. And now we're accumulating a water table on top of that low permeability ore. And the fifth factor was that there were liquefiable conditions in the ore that was under leach and in the in-heap pond and in other areas of the heap leach facility. Essentially, the ore was saturated or nearly saturated, and for those in the geotechnical field, it was contractive, meaning that it could liquefy. So ultimately, and the numbers here reference the previous causes, the rising water table due to aggressive leaching on that low permeability ore with an impaired leach collection system caused a slope failure on that over-steepened slope. And that then triggered a failure of all that liquefied material, which is what flowed out and over the embankment. So all 5 of those things were contributing factors to this catastrophic failure as per the findings of the Independent Review Board. Some other observations I think are important too to think about here. The Independent Review Board and or Delve Underground that I mentioned earlier both looked at causes of the failure, both looked at various things that might be possible causes. There was winter ore stacking in every month of every year. The maximum per the design was supposed to be 275 days per year. Over 325 days of stacking occurred in every year up to 2023. Solution heating was supposed to keep the heap warm and prevent freezing in the heap in certain areas, but that only operated for a few months in the first year of operation. There was side slope seepage on the heap leach facility, something that should be clearly seen as a problematic situation. These are meant to be permeable facilities. You shouldn't see seepage out the side of your heap leach facility. That required seepage collection systems. They installed French drains to try and manage this extra seepage. There was ponding on top of the heap. Anecdotally, I heard stories of them building, berms to try and contain this ponding on the top of the heap. There were sand boils on the top of the heap. The liner system construction, as I mentioned earlier, allowed deterioration of critical liner layers. The liner, for example, according to the Delve Underground analysis, the liner that was affected by the failure was left exposed for an average of 10.9 months in areas relevant to the failure. And that liner being exposed, especially in freezing conditions, allows that geosynthetic clay liner to freeze, which can damage it. It also allowed it, in some cases, probably to hydrate in conditions without confining stress, which also can damage it and weakens it. So the evidence suggests, and there was some samples of geosynthetic clay liner, that the clay liner was degraded in some areas, and much of the existing liner might be affected. And the drain materials at the base of the heap were less permeable than planned. So let's look at all those things. I've listed them here on the right side of this, or so the left side of this table. What was Victoria Gold's role in this? They were the accountable party in most cases. They were the ones who decided to do these things. They were the ones who weren't paying attention, if it came to that, I suppose. And in some cases, with respect to the heapage or the construction of the French drains, they responded to the symptom, but they didn't respond to the cause. And what about Yukon government's response or action? The evidence tells us or at least there is no evidence that Yukon government considered any of these matters in licensing or assessment, or that inspectors identified these as matters of concern, or that YG engaged qualified experts to conduct geotechnical inspections or review final designs or as-built reports. There's no evidence that any of these matters were taken seriously, and yet some of them should have been clear signs that there was a problem. So, I'm not a teacher, but today I get to grade people. And I think in this case, both the company and the Yukon government failed. So let's talk about operational leach solution management. This isn't what caused the failure, but certainly it may well have contributed. The events pond, as I mentioned earlier, its primary purpose is for storage of high-risk cyanide-containing solution. It's meant to deal with storing cyanide if something goes wrong. So the license required a certain amount of storage in that pond at all times, except, of course, if there was a big event, and then you had to empty it within 30 days. Victoria Gold failed to provide that storage for substantial periods in every operating year before 2024. Months in every year. And not just in freshet, in the fall, in the winter. The highest risk event was in late 2022, what I call a near miss. At some points in December of 2022, there was less than 1.5 days of storage for a pumping system failure. The company at the time was experiencing pump system challenges. They were having to do maintenance on those pumps. There were challenges. That led to the in-heap pond having water level, solution levels in it above the red alert level. It was very nearly full. The events pond was also full, not of water that had cyanide in it, water that they pumped in there. There was no cyanide treatment capacity on site, and the temperatures were hovering around -40 just when pump systems fail. It was a very near miss. Was that a responsible company? Nope, fail. How did Yukon respond to this? 2020, no explicit identification or notice about failing to meet the desired available storage. At some point they said, that they mentioned in an inspection report that there was a desired available storage. Yes, there is one. Did you meet it? Nobody said. In 2021, there was one inspection report that said it might not have been met. 2022, the May-June inspection report finally explicitly cites the failure to meet the desired available storage. By this time, it's happened every year for months. And by October, they're asking for more frequent reporting, not asking them to do anything about it, because the treatment system was going to come online and that would solve the problem in a few months. But this was the fall of 2022. This is what led us to where we were in December of 2022. In 2023, no mention of it. And a fall event noted in one inspection report. No evidence of follow-up at that point. In May of 2023, Yukon government did finally issue charge VGC for offenses related to some of the desired available storage related exceedances in the spring and summer of 2021 and 2022. But those charges did not extend to the egregious exceedances in late 2022. Was that good enough for a pass? I'm not a teacher, so I can't decide. I'll leave it to you. What about water treatment capacity? And Farzad talked a little bit about this earlier. For metals and suspended solids, the non-cyanide treatment, they had a water treatment plant by 2022 it was commissioned in early 2023 to treat the metals and suspended solids. But in April 2020, they had a non-compliant discharge of water, 43,000 cubic meters, because they had no capacity to treat. And it turned out they needed treatment, which in the mine planning they expected they would not. Na-Cho Nyäk done during the permitting had argued that this site should have treatment for metals and treatment for cyanide from the day it started operation. We were not successful in that, but it was an argument we made. So similar water quality conditions happened for mine contact water in 2021 and 2022. How did they address it? Oh, they pumped it to the events pond. How did the events pond get filled up in 2022? Oh, because we didn't have water treatment for mine contact water, so we moved it up there. There were plans at some points for emergency storage pond, a high volume filtration plant in the ADR plant. Those never materialized. The water license required water treatment in place before the start of phase 2, and that was commissioned only days before the start of phase 2. The site conditions clearly demonstrated that water treatment was needed sooner, but VGC chose not to respond. Is that a responsible company? I think it's a fail. So what about Yukon government? In 2020, there was an inspector's direction, develop a freshet management plan. There was a warning letter. 2021, 2022, 2023, little follow-up, with freshet management, VGC relying on use of the desired available storage for cyanide solution to store their mine contact water, compromising the space for that high-risk solution. So Yukon government probably gets a pass in 2020 and then probably a fail. So what about cyanide water treatment? Farzad spoke to this earlier, so I don't need to add a lot of details to this. The water license required a cyanide detoxification plant, and that's a quote, operational before HLF, before heap leach facility phase 1, and a water treatment plant with capacity to treat 691 cubic meters per day of cyanide solution before heap leach facility phase 2. As far as we know, there was no cyanide detoxification plant for phase 1. At one point, I was advised that there was hydrogen peroxide on site that could be used to destroy cyanide. The cyanide treatment system that was established in February 2023, Farzad referenced that earlier, was a 4-page design that replaced a design that was approved during licensing. There was no lab testing, no bench scale testing, no pilot testing, no detailed designs. Farzad, we hired him because I looked at that design and said, this doesn't look like it cuts it to me, and I'm not a water treatment expert. Farzad, as he mentioned, confirmed that that was problematic. Ultimately, Yukon government concluded the system was acceptable, but there was no evidence that Yukon government engaged a water treatment expert. The treatment system proved ineffective when the failure occurred. So, does anybody get a pass there? I don't think so. Is there more? There were 5 earlier spills of cyanide from the heap leach facility system. There was no substantive enforcement action. YG did engage an expert to review cyanide management. They gave a report in July of 2022. By January of 2023, Yukon issued some direction to the company to provide an implementation plan by February of 2023. That plan came in November of 2023. There were many recommendations from that still outstanding when the failure occurred. There was a January 2024 slope failure on the heap leach facility. A single ore bench of 23 meters at angle of repose, significantly exceeding the design height of 12 meters, an oversteepened slope. Have we heard of that before? Frozen material in the drainage layer, a damaged clay liner. There's no evidence, again, that Yukon government engaged a qualified expert to inspect the failure or advise about causes or the adequacy of the responses. There's no evidence that Victoria Gold Corporation used this as a learning experience to improve its heap leach facility operations. There's no evidence that when the failure occurred in Turkey in a heap leach facility, that Victoria Gold said, gee, we should have a look at our heap leach operations to figure out whether we should make some changes. And, I mean, just as another example, in the first year of operation alone, there were approximately 20 reportable spills. When I raised this with company management, the response was, the reporting requirements are more stringent for us than other mines in the territory. When I checked the licenses, it turned out that wasn't true. What about the permitting stage, since we're going to talk about systemic issues? The original water licensing occurred in 2014-2015. The Yukon intervention does not address heap leach facility design. There is no evidence that Yukon government engaged qualified experts to review the design. And then there was a license amendment in 2018-19, an amendment needed to approve the heap leach facility that was almost complete in construction, that wasn't the same one that was proposed in the original license. As Chief Hope mentioned in her earlier talk, that never went through assessment. What got built on the ground was never assessed. And it was licensed after it was almost all complete. And so in that licensing process, the Yukon government intervention does not address the heap leach facility design. Yukon government did not raise any concerns about the heap leach facility or mine design at technical pre-hearing conference. Yukon government didn't participate in the public hearing. There's no evidence that they engaged qualified experts to review the design. Does the regulator pass with that one? I don't think so. So finally, what about industry as a whole? There are lots of industry guidelines out there aimed at raising the bar and building corporate accountability. The Mining Association of Canada Towards Sustainable Mining Initiative, the Global Industry Standard on Tailings Management, the Canadian Dam Association guidance on application of dam safety guidelines to mining dams, the Initiative for Responsible Mining Assurance, the International Cyanide Code. Those are all good initiatives aimed at making mining better and more accountable. The Yukon Chamber of Mines, the industry organization here, their website doesn't recommend or require members to sign on to national and international industry leading organizations in order to mine here. VGC chose not to belong even to the Mining Association of Canada or the International Cyanide Code, as far as we can tell. Certainly, Na-Cho recommended they should be required to be a member of the International Cyanide Code during permitting. Again, we were not successful. The Towards Sustainable Mining initiative has been in place for more than 20 years, but the Chamber of Mines doesn't have that referenced on their website, it doesn't seem. We're 17 months in and there's no real concrete action to address changes that are needed in the fallout from the Eagle Gold disaster. So where does this leave us? There have been important investigative reports delivered. The Independent Review Board report, the Delve report, both look at the physical causes of this failure. Neither looks at the systemic causes that got us there. It's clear that Victoria Gold's actions contributed substantially to the failure. The government and regulatory systems were not effective in identifying and responding to what should have been clear indicators of significant problems. Ultimately, a massive cultural shift is needed for government. There needs to be better and more informed oversight of design, construction, and operations. Government needs to engage and rely on qualified experts, and they need to improve internal capacity. And those things are recommendations coming from the Independent Review Board as well. They are things that Na-Cho has been advocating for years before this failure occurred. There needs to be clear enforcement authority that is not tempered by political interests. And requirements for what I've called here independent tailings review boards need to be put in place. And this should apply not just to tailings facilities, but to heap leach facilities for sure. That is industry best practice. And governments need to recognize and effectively manage the downside risks of mining. Mining companies' risk tolerance levels are not the same as the risk tolerance levels should be for public government. They must be and should be different. Government leadership means taking action against or shutting down mining projects that don't comply with acceptable risk. whether that's environmental or financial, for the public. And government leadership does not equal allowing mining companies to offload their downside risks onto the public and local communities. And that is what happened here.
Hello, everyone. So I'd just like to say Zanutso good day, and Insi Helaina Uji, Dankate Hujia Uji. My name's Helaina Moses, and my traditional name's Hujia. I'd just like to introduce myself and talk about a little bit of my experience. So now I currently sit on council with Chief Dawna Hope, but previously I've experienced a lot at Victoria Gold. I've actually worked for them for 3 years as environmental technician, and then after leaving my position there, I've worked as the Victoria Gold liaison for the First Nation of Na-Cho. So I worked in that position probably from 2021 to 2023 before I got elected to council. So during my time as the liaison, it was difficult for me. It was a challenging thing to do, especially in the terms of communication. There wasn't really a good communication line, and then of what we expected as a First Nation government versus their expectations were totally different. And then I just like to get into, the management plans that Bill talked about. I struggled with that quite a lot because they had multiple management plans, from birds to wildlife to water management. And I do believe that they did submit these management plans, through YESAB and through the permitting process. And there was a lot of wishes and wants in there that, that we coordinated to see. But in the end, when the acceptance happened of the approval of their mine, we didn't see it. There's a lot of examples in their management plans that promised us respectful and sustainable workloads to those management plans, but a lot of things didn't come out after the approval process. So I'd just like to flag that because it was a challenge for me because I was reading management plans and asking where we're at these things, and I never really got a good direct response. I just like to also talk about a benefit impact agreement, which was promised to our community, to our citizens, that we would have benefits from this mine and good benefits for our community so that we could see infrastructure, so we could see community development, so we could see our businesses thrive. But that didn't happen. It did to some extent with people, but some of them got left out, which was not fair. And I feel like the CBA, we really need to work towards a more collaborative approach to what is reasonable and reality. The CBA was difficult because it promised our people jobs, but our community is struggling too, right, with the opioid crisis. So where do we meet to meet the obligations of that CBA when everything's changing so fast and day-to-day life and everything that's going on? These CBA agreements don't even have a review clause. So how do we, make changes on the benefit agreements while our community is changing? So when we move forward into those conversations with proponents, it's beneficial to the proponent and to the community to make sure that these benefit agreements are, very works for both parties, and then there's a dedicated commitment to reevaluate if scenarios change. So did it work for us? I would say maybe a quarter of it worked for us. So that being said, I hope and I wish for, a more collaborative approach to the IBAs, the benefit impact agreements that the First Nation and that proponents will build together when mining companies come to our traditional territory. I'd also like to talk about, thank the presenters today and everyone who took the time to listen and meet with us and hear our perspective of things. We didn't predict this to happen. We did not, but there were things that have been flagged in the past that could have led us to this. Like we talked about water management at site with the event pond, and I am so thankful that event pond was stable and okay after the failure. We could have been in a totally different scenario right now if that event pond left. I just wanted to flag that because I don't think they say that event pond is good for a flash flood and whatever it may have been, 1,000-year flood, but we barely kept it in empty. For the whole time I even worked there, we were pumping water in there and checking it regularly. So I just feel like, thank goodness, thank the creator that the event pond is still functioning, or else we would be in a different scenario. I also like to, talk about our reciprocal relationship with First Nations people and the land. Just, reflecting on Mark's last slide there with the cultural impacts. My grandfather told me, we have to give back to the land and the land will give back to you. So when we're giving the land back cyanide, what does that mean for our future? We're not going to be successful in hunting and trapping and fishing when we can't even control what's going on and what's going into the environment. So I'd just like to flag that because a lot of citizens have trap lines up there that used Haggard Creek to gather their water, to do their dishes, to cook their food. So what does that leave them? It's just those little things that do have a lot of impacts on our people, especially the ones that are actively on the land. And we have a little place there called Little Dave's Lookout. And it was such a culturally important place for us, for our young hunters to go and learn how to hunt. We can't use that anymore. And it hurts me. It hurts me that I won't be able to teach my grandchildren about this area because it's eliminated until we can see what actually the impacts are in the future. So I'd just like to share that. And I'd also like to talk about Spud. Spud was a beaver that lived at kilometer 43. He was my friend. I went and I water sampled there and always spent time with him when I could. But when the heap leach failure came, they wanted to eliminate him. They wanted to remove him and euthanize him. Yes. So I was struggling with this. I know it made it to one of the news articles anyways, but just like to say, we want to protect all animals on this watershed. We don't want to kill them. This is their home. This is where they live. This is where they thrive and where they wanted to be. And who are we to go and remove them from a place they call home? I'd just like to talk too more about the spills. I know NND was very involved in, water management, and we were always flagging, like we were on site every other day. We were participating in this project since it started. We talk about having a good relationship with proponents, but Na-Cho didn't even get invited to the gold pour. Now, how is that a partner? So I'd just like to finish off with, the lessons learned that we've experienced through this, and that economic reconciliation needs to happen. We need to be responsible on how we mine and how we work with First Nation governments. Because it's not just us suffering, you guys are too. You guys are taxpayers. We are all paying for it. So that being said, I'd just like to, explain a little bit about what I went through as a liaison, because it was a challenge for me. And with my background in environmental monitoring, I have over 10 years of environmental monitoring experience where I had that experience to bring out onto the site, to share my traditional knowledge with them, share a First Nations perspective that goes into these working relationships, which was hard for me because it wasn't respected as I thought it would be. So I just like to end it with that. So thank you.
My turn. Sure.
Work from yours and I'll just.
Sure. So where are we now and what has changed? We've been trying to work with Yukon government on successor legislation, and that doesn't seem to be going anywhere. we have been working to help with that. And the morning of the slide, we had already scheduled that day, we were going to go through our mining policy, and council was going to go through page by page and approve it that day. And the slide happened at 5:30 that morning. So it made it just that much more critical for us to pass that mining policy. With that said, we haven't been able to get back to amending it because now we do. The failure caused that. We've had a whole bunch of challenges since then that need to be addressed and added into the policy to make sure that we're ready and prepared for any kind of situation. And we need to make sure that we get this right. We're paying for 8 dead mines now. Now we're on our own through the DTA. We're not getting funding from Canada anymore, and that just makes it that much more critical that we need to do this Yukon made. And that's what our final agreements are all about. It's Yukon made. We needed to take those decision-making powers away from Ottawa, from people who don't even step foot on our lands. They don't care, they don't have heart, and they don't care if we have clean water tomorrow. And that's a shame. We have one of the most rare leftover untouched places. We say that, although it is impacted, but we should be able to do that without hurting the land, and we need to fix what we've hurt. So that's what we want to see now. We have our mining policy for our traditional territory and want to work in the best ways to make sure that you guys are working in the best ways, because we know you can. We go to geoscience, we go to Roundup, and we know what's capable. And what we have in our backyard is a mess, and we know that it hurts you guys, as Helaina said, and we know that we can do better on a Yukon stance, and I think that we can do it together. What next? What needs to happen next? We need to fix the broken industry relationships. It's going to be a challenge. We've been schmoozed, we've been promised everything was perfect until the company got exactly what they wanted. We never saw them again. My citizens were very hurt by that because they thought they had a good friend. They thought they had a good friend. And when it came down to it, they were abandoned. And when they asked for them, they were ignored. Right to the very end, right to this very day. They still want to talk to him. They still want accountability to be met. And I don't blame them. We gave a lot up. We gave a lot up for them to go there. And like Helaina said, not even knowing how much more it was going to cost us. My citizens are scared of the environment. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. And we don't know where it's going, we don't know where it's coming up. Groundwater's special that way, especially in the wintertime. When the surface waters are frozen, what do you think is feeding the creeks? It comes from the mountaintops, and groundwater is pressurized that way, and it's special, and we need to start respecting it as such. The old saying, out of sight, out of mind, no, that's not the way forward. We need better understandings, full, wholesome understandings, And that's what our mining policy is about, to make sure that we have a full circle of perceptions and everybody's contributing to make sure that we're doing the best that we can with the best that we've got, thinking about our children and our grandchildren and their grandchildren into the future. We cannot keep doing this. And I'm hoping that we can be a lot more successful into the future. There's companies around the world that can show us to do that. And there are areas where there's long-term mining planning that goes beyond 10 years. Unfortunately, we didn't even make 10 years before the failure. So we need to do better at planning. Goes beyond the scope. We are still asking for a public inquiry. As you've heard today, the issues are compounded and they go deep, way far back into even the ESSA process itself. How did we get from here to here? How did we assess everything over 2.5 years and nothing we assessed is on the land? Those are the things we need to fix. And those are the things that we need to do and fix together, because we keep saying it, but we need your help as the public to hold the public government accountable for that. And they owe that to us. That's their job. Meaningful, authentic, and transparent accountability. That's all we're trying to do within our mining policy. We've taken all of your industry books and tried to incorporate them into ours, so that this isn't nothing new, and it's probably not a surprise to you guys in the industry. We're only asking for the relationships that are required to make sure that we're all successful. And this isn't just our crisis, it's a Yukon crisis. It's Yukoners' right to know what happened, because you and I, Yukoner alike, we've got $250 million into that project. We broke that down on a household standard, and that cost each and every one of our households $13,000 to date. I know I can't afford that. We'd like to see the implementation of all the recommendations. We need to really do better. And although Yukon government waited to make any kind of commitment to even the IRB report's recommendations when it came out, right up until the final days before the election. The newly elected Yukon government, they must make clear, meaningful commitment to implementing these recommendations and make sure that they follow through with an action plan. And we really need to see this prioritized through their budget. Right now, as we've all said, that they are still running on pure luck. We can't keep running and hoping that we stay with luck. It's going to catch up to us and bite us. We need support in true new mineral legislation developed with Yukon First Nations and aligned with the final agreement and the First Nation final agreements, the umbrella final agreement, and all the provisions within each and every one of our individual agreements. We need legislation that brings Yukon up to the regulatory standard that we need, even just to our neighboring jurisdictions in Alberta and BC. I do not understand how they can have officials that come here and tell us flat out, I can't believe they're doing this. They would never get away with this at home. And we have land claims on top of that. I don't understand it. We need legislation that brings teeth to the regulations and accountability and make sure that that's upheld and do better. Understand and adhere to Yukon First Nations own mining policies and the land use planning. We've signed an MOU with Yukon government for the land use planning. We've got more on this tomorrow. It's been a very slow go, and it is a constant challenge for us to keep things moving forward. So pressure from the industry will help that. The day of the gold disaster, that's when we approve that mining policy, and it carries the same date. It's informed by our inherent Aboriginal and treaty rights and title as self-governing First Nation who have been stewards of our lands and waters for time immemorial. And this policy aims to provide clarity and transparency to proponents that are seeking to conduct mineral exploration and development in the traditional territory of the Na-Cho Dun. Right from staking a claim, through planning, exploration activities, constructing and operating the mine, right to closure, reclamation, and ecological restoration, and further monitoring to make sure that the conditions remain as they do when we left them. We need to build trust through all these actions. Many mining operators throughout the territory, they strive for responsible and sustainability within their work, and they need to strive for positive, authentic relationships with us and all the rest who work on the land. We have, especially in our traditional territory, we have sharing accords with our neighboring nations, and we're working better together to try to understand how we can share our resources to double the eyes and ears on the land, for instance, because we're all related and we all care about the stewardship of those lands. Eagle Gold eroded a trust, and I say this to all the proponents in our traditional territory. It's going to be a challenge to rebuild those, but we need to. We need to rebuild our relationships and those trusts with my citizens to ensure that we know that you are not going to do exactly what they did on the land, and you're going to include us in effective partnerships moving forward. We had a lot of good words with Eagle Gold. We had a lot of community meetings. Even in this document here, this is the executive screening report from YESA, their report and recommendations, and it actually says in here, it praised them for all the community and engagement that they had. We need to repair those relationships and move forward together in a good way. We know we need mining, but we also know that we could be doing a lot better, and those need to be reflected in the actions on the land. I know it's been a long day, and I thank you for participating. And if there is any questions, we're more than welcome to answer those. And I know too that sometimes things take time to really sink in, and as this has been a long go for us, it will continue to be a long go until we get things right. And that's what we really want. We want to see things right. Like Helaina said, right down to the protection of spud.
So for those of you that are in the room with us, we're just going to ask you to line up behind the mic there for any questions. And if you are online, feel free to drop them in the chat and I will point the questions to the team. Yeah.
I've been involved in commissioning mechanical systems for over 40 years. First came to the Yukon in 65 maybe, did Kantong Mine. I worked there as a young apprentice. So I'm not a miner, but I try to be a miner. It's fun, it's a nice hobby. But when I listen to your story, and I believe you, there's no question about that. But my first question would be, it's all about leakage. Number one, that's it. Number two, when I commissioned leakage, when I commissioned head pressures, there's 2.307 feet per 1 PSI of pressure. Where in the commissioning report, if you've seen one, of the full facility by the design engineer, if it was a design-built facility, what in the commissioning report, it should state in there what those pressures are and the tolerance you have to know that there's a leak. And with the systems that I've been building for testing, I'm down to 0.1 millimeter of an inch, 1 millimeter pressure of water column. That's fine. And yet we're looking at huge pressure differentials between the leakage and all of them. If it goes up and down, what system was built in to alarm? And all these alarm systems have to be in there, and they have to be in the commissioning report, an independent commissioning report. It has to be there. If not, the project does not start. It all has to be proven. I mean, I did the college, which was never finished. I even had to test the sewer traps. And they weren't installed. It's a simple thing of pressure. What's the pressure? You put a suction cup and no, doesn't change. That means they weren't impressed. Another $50,000 or more to dig up all those things. Do you think the government did it? It's a government building. No, they didn't do it. I put it in the report. And I do all these things. The college was never finished. So when I look at your facility, I mean, it's a disaster, a true disaster in incompetence. But who is the design engineer is responsible for producing the commissioning report, authorizing. The government hasn't too much to do except for environmental issues. So I'm just totally confused that if you've seen them, if you've ever seen a commission report, who signed it, who is the design engineer who's responsible for reviewing those reports, and maybe even being signed off by the government. There's a procedure, and I mean, I could go on for hours, but that's the one thing. It's all about leakage. It's all about pressure differential, and that's what I do. I mean, I did them on the space programs. I do it for aviation, for Boeing, for Lockheed Martin. I do it for them, but and I'm First Nations, and it's a First Nations company, but I'd never get a chance to do the things that I think should be done. And the bottom line is that a lot of it, right down underneath the carpet, is corruption. People do get paid for just signing it off and getting rid of it and getting in the program. That's where I start looking, and every time it should go to court, it seems to get into the lobby of the first examination for discovery, and they say, oh, Albert, you can go home now, it's all settled. And people start taking early retirement in the government. And you can see it. But you have to get back to, in your project, pressure, differential, that's what it's all about, So I'd leave it to you. I'm totally.
What's your name just for the record? Sorry. What's your name? Sorry.
Albert Rock.
Albert Rock. Thank you.
Yeah. I've sat on board with Champagne Asia. I was chairman of the board of Dawna, Alberta, amazing man. Science and Technology Award for Canada, first a lot of awards. If you want to know more about me, just do Google Albert Rock blogger, and there's a full half-hour thing the CBC in Canada did. So that credibility, I'd like to retire. I'm in my 80s now, but it seems that the more I try to retire, the more just stuff like that. The things aren't getting done, and I feel like it's just it's painful.
Yep.
And I'm trying to retire, but when I see these guys, trying to get something done, and then they're getting, well, you people are all bad, mining.
Sorry, just getting.
Well, I just get upset. It's the good people that are getting hurt. Somehow, there's a few bad ones that seem to get control of every damn thing and make everything look bad. I mean, there's nothing wrong with mining if it's done right. There's nothing wrong with anything that's done right. Produces profit, and this guy here, I mean, he's done more than I've ever seen anybody in the world. And Chad back there is part, he'll probably stay quiet.
I must say, that when I graduated from UBC, I think it was 1970, hey, it was a long time ago, hey. But the interesting thing is when I graduated, it was illegal to put anything into a drainage. It was against the law, and if you were discovered, hey, there were huge fines, hey, and you could even go to jail for it, hey, and that was in 1970, and the law has to be changed here in the Yukon, and we're going to help that, and it should be illegal to put anything into a drainage to start with, hey? And I just, it was kind of interesting. I ended up at one of the last talks today, and I was like bored, hey? Because the talk was about all of the geologists, hey? That are being hired, hey? To do geology in the Yukon. And there's like literally, I don't know, maybe 100, but geologists that are employed, hey, that the Yukon is paying, hey, for them to do geology to find more mines, basically. But the thing is they only have 2 people monitoring pollution. Only 2. Why don't they cut some of these geologists out and have more people monitoring, hey, all basically companies that are putting bad products into the drainages, and so the laws have to be changed here. That's all I can say, and the monitoring has to be increased.
And Charles, can you just say your name and just for the record on it?
Oh, I'm Charles Fipke or Chuck Fipke or Carlos.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
No, I'm a very well-known man around the world. Extremely animals. I think he would spend $1 million to go around a trail that a moose would travel on. He'll spend thousands. Well, I hope he's got some calendars with him, because he goes out and he has pictures of animals all over the world, and he'll spend millions of dollars to save a little bird. You're not too happy about bees anymore, are you?
We have a few more questions just in the chat. So do you have anything else? Or
If anybody wants a calendar,
Yeah, he's pushing the calendar.
Thank you so much.
I brought all these
Thank you. Do we have any more questions in the room? Okay, thank you. And just please to say your name for the record.
Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Mead, and full disclosure, after 25 years in Yukon government, I was boots on the ground involvement in 8 mine abandonments, including the one we've been talking about. But we'll pass on from that. I'm now retired, which is something I'm proud to say, so I will say that very readily. I was really curious about Lisa's comment around, I'm not sure if a ray of sunshine is the right way of putting it, but she did suggest that what happened on the downstream monitoring approach and the collaboration that happened post-incident seemed to align not with only with sort of holistic values, etc., from FND's perspective, but also managed to bring government agencies into that space in a sort of collaborative way. And I was just wondering if the panel up the front there perhaps could share some perspectives on how that might expand beyond just that one moment in time in response, and perhaps be a thread through both your own policy, which I know it is, but maybe more broadly on the laws that Chuck was just speaking about and everybody in the room has known need updating. Is there a way you see that sort of that spirit and intent carrying through potentially new minerals legislation?
I guess really we've been fighting for that the whole way long, because I truly believe that is exactly what our final agreements are all about. The final agreements, like I mentioned earlier, are for Yukoners on a whole, and really they cover every benefit that we could think of, from protecting who we are as people on the land, to water, to even economic benefits that we all share. That's where we need to get to. And that's where we continue just to say that we need Yukon government to uphold our agreements in the spirit and intent and start developing those relationships in that realm. There is awesome benefits in the future of that relationship for Yukoners and for the environment as well, because they're paying a high price right now too. Our animals, our fish, all on the decline. We need to start doing better to make sure that we don't lose all that. Thank you.
And if you just want to state your name and affiliation.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Odin Miller. I work at Lands Manager for White River First Nation. Thank you so much for the presentations and for the opportunity to attend. It was extremely interesting, kind of sobering. My question is, White River is currently engaging with the Casino Mine project, and it's going to a YESAB panel review process. They just filed their ESE statement, as I think most people here probably know. White River doesn't currently have a position on Casino, but I think it's safe to say that nobody wants the outcome that happened with Eagle Gold. And I was just curious if you guys had any perspectives or suggestions about how during the YESAB process, the panel review process, how to engage, how to steer the outcome towards something more positive than what we've seen with the Eagle Gold experience.
I guess really all what we can offer for White River is those relationships with Na-Cho Nyäk to get together and share our experiences through those. And hopefully you can take the best of what we've experienced and also the worst of what we've experienced to make sure that you turn those into the best of your experience.
Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. We'd love to reach out sometime.
Anyone else in the room before we move it online?
I just have one picture to show you. See all the inky reddish part. That's That's illegal. This is a picture.
Just gonna get you to speak into the mic here.
Hey, pardon?
We just have folks online. Yeah.
Hold this and do this?
Yeah, yeah.
Multitask? No, no. Okay, you've all seen it, okay? That pink area is illegal air quality. And this is the big meeting room over there. That's the big meeting over there the next day. This is Sunday, Monday. This is the right now, what it's in here, which is still not good. And we're fairly crowded in here. It's the cause of ventilation and not enough fresh air. This is CO2. This is what it's supposed to be. So, okay, we can take it. We think we're tough. That's the same thing I found in grade 1 and grade 2 classrooms. I have a lady that's a senior, that's a teacher, you know, already retired, but she goes into the schools all the time. She takes a logger with her every time. That's what I do, I take data. My whole life is taking data. This is wrong. I haven't released this yet, but this information is going to be probably in a month or two in the Globe and Mail. They want to do a full article, and I want to do it on Native schools because now we have our own curriculum, but I think the schools still belong to Yukon government, and it's their responsibility to provide it. And the reason we do this is because we can save a lot of money in fresh air. We don't like to put fresh air into the classroom. As soon as the room goes fresh, it becomes positive, and we can get clean air. So this is my project now.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing that. We're going to move it online to some questions. We have a question from Nellie for Chief Hope. And the question is, what is the expectations of the next Yukon government?
To provide a good start on new mineral legislation and to uphold our final agreements in the spirit and intent that we signed it. If you open our final agreement, we're one of the first 4 that signed, and along with Na-Cho Nyäk Dun's signature, the other 2 signatures, one from Canada and one from Yukon, both those signatures were conservative. So I'm hoping that they remember the spirit and intent for which they signed that agreement too.
And we have another question that says, what are some lessons we've learned to ensure CBAs moving forward?
Oh my goodness, I don't know if we have enough time for this one. We're gonna need to book another full day. We do have a very long list. And it is forever growing because we're still experiencing some of the things and challenges out at site. And especially now, it's going into another phase, into the sales phase. And again, the doors are just closing and closing and closing for us. So those are some of the things that we want to see improved into the future. Relationships with us. We all struggle with capacity. It's not just us. We know it's everyone. We know it's the industry. We know it's government. We know it's us. We need to bond together in true relationships and true partnerships to make sure that we can monitor and uphold our agreements and our planning and our mining the way that it should be, in respectful ways into the future, and make sure they don't fail like they have been. We need to stop that trend in the Yukon.
We have one here for the technical team, and I will say to the folks in our technical team that are online, feel free to jump in. The question is, we talked about concentrations of cobalt, cyanide, and nitrate released, but is there a cumulative toxic impact of all of those together?
Yes. I'm certainly not a toxicologist, but yes, there would be cumulative effects above and beyond, any single one. And I really, like I said, this isn't my field, so I can't go into any more detail than that. But yes, it is a real concern, and it's also, you know, limited understanding of that as well. I don't know if Lisa, if you're still on, if you have anything to add.
Hey, Mark. Yeah, no, I agree with you. The mixture effect has been tested with our toxicity testing and seems to be affecting invertebrates in the creek disproportionately. So, yeah, we still don't know what that could mean long term, but we are thinking it has to do with this mixture effect rather than one chemical of concern alone. But yeah, we definitely need more testing and monitoring long term to understand that better.
And the second part of that question, which I'm not sure if this team can answer, is, and how did we get here? So it seems like there was a lot of more warning signs that were either missed or potentially ignored. How are we supposed to have confidence moving forward?
On our NND website, we have an emergency website. There is a form there that you can fill out and send to your MLA. We need a public inquiry to get to the bottom of this, to make sure that this doesn't happen again.
Another technical, how much of the cobalt and other heavy metals in the McQuestion watershed have come from Eagle Gold, and how much from the UKHM operation? If we're unable to answer that today, we can make a commitment to get back to the asker.
No. They're separate though, right?
In the McQuestion, they certainly meet. Yeah. So the question, Sarah, was about cobalt and what else?
Oh, just use it.
Sorry, the question was about cobalt and what else?
Cobalt and other heavy metals in the McQuestion watershed. How much have come from Eagle Gold and how much have come from the UKHM operation?
Yeah, that's not a question that I can answer off the top of my
Okay,
head.
no worries.
They would have had to have done soil testing of the drainage samples before.
We're just going to get you.
To get a baseline. To get a proper baseline before the mine was commissioned, they'd have to collect samples to see how much cobalt and other heavy minerals were in the system before the mine was put into production.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to do baseline studies first, eh?
Mm-hmm.
And they should do these with actually First Nations people should actually be in charge of doing the baseline studies. And that's something we have to do too.
Yeah, commissioning process.
Sarah, I can add a little bit
Please do,
to
yeah.
that. So certainly there are data available for the South McQuestion. You know, there's historic mining in the Keno Hill district, and there's monitoring as a result of that. Environment Canada actually has a monitoring station on the South McQuestion. Yukon government has done some work on that, and there's actually a report looking at establishment of kind of water quality objectives for the South McQuestion. So there's been some work done there. There are data available, but you know, I can't speak off the top of my head as to what the balance of contributions is as a result of that.
Another question that we also might not be able to answer here, but to the knowledge of the panel, has there been any studies on the true benefits to Yukon household in terms of I mean, we've heard about the economics, but has there been? She said most mining personnel are taking their paycheck out of territory. Is this a document? Has this been documented?
I know that our development corporation has been trying to quantify that and doing our own internal, but it's only for us, for the First Nation of what we've lost and our citizens and our citizens' companies, but it has not expanded out to assess beyond that.
Another question, and I know that there's not a lot. We were in the news talking about this not too long ago. There's not a lot we can share, but where is NND at with talks with YG on new mining legislation?
We're not sure because we haven't heard from the new guy yet.
Oh, sorry. I was at his talks, hey, and he seems to be extremely intelligent, hey, extremely intelligent, and he knows really what's going on. But he said that he hasn't even he's not even. It's going to be in next week before he even becomes the official premier, I guess, so it's not even he isn't even the premier yet, hey, and he stated that he had a very robust amount of people that he's picked for his team, hey, and he's picked different people of different educations for his team, and he emphasized how strong his team was, and so he has to put them all into give them all their appointments. So he hasn't had a chance to do anything yet, basically. So I think we have to wait a couple of weeks before we can, basically comment on it.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, we have to give him a little chance. Hey, yeah.
And I'll let Dawna speak to some of what we had stated before of the challenges with supporting the draft framework. And I know this is a hard one because there's a lot we can't speak to.
I guess what I can say about the framework is one thing that we really would like to see, because it's successor legislation and it's the whole idea is to align with our final agreement. With that said, it should very much look like our final agreement. We cannot start from a document that is outdated and doesn't work for us. We have to start from the final agreement and make mining right to the landscape. And that's all there is to it.
Another question online with the sale process nearing. Has there been any discussions with NND citizens in support of the sale?
We have started to have those conversations with our citizens, but we don't have enough information, prior informed information, to make that decision. I continue to say, when you buy a house or a car, you need to devolve beforehand. The sewer's broke. You're going to need to buy that. The roof is leaking. You're going to need to replace that. There's holes in the foundation that's going to need to be redone. We don't know that. We don't know, and I don't know how to tell my citizens what we're buying. So until that happens, we can't have those wholesome discussions with them. So yeah, that's where we're at.
The next question is, which I think stemming from the chapter we had on the systemic failures. How can the public have any trust in a reopen plan to be held accountable based on the history and date of the history to date, and what changes need to be made at all regulatory stages?
Thanks for the question. I guess, you know, my last slide spoke to what needs to be a sea change for government. And I think the only way that the public can regain trust is to have government demonstrate that they know how to regulate one of these things, because this demonstrates, and it's not the first project, it's just the worst one. It demonstrates that they didn't know how to regulate it. They were not capable of regulating it in the way that it needed to be done. There were plenty of signs for an informed person. That's what we learned from the Independent Review Board. There were plenty of signs for an informed person to say, we have a problem here. We need to fix this problem. And even on the water management side, NND was arguing for years that there was a significant water management problem at that site, that the water management risks that were being taken were too severe. So I think that's really the big change that needs to happen for the public to regain trust that we can have good mining in this territory, because it can be done. It is possible to design heap leach facilities that sit on sloping plastic liners. It has been done, it can be done again, but this was not the way to do it.
So we have one last question, and I think it's probably for all of you, and please jump into Helaina. Does NND have specific asks from Yukoners in relationship with the UFA or on how to work together to change these outdated mining laws or to prevent this type of disaster from ever happening again? What is the action that Yukoners as a whole can take?
I would say ask more questions. Ask more questions. That's the thing. The way things are designed right now, we have a very public process for assessing. We try to get everyone's involved. But I know too, after the failure, I guess over this past summer, CPAWS did a little video about that. They flew over the site and they contributed a whole bunch of ideas and recommendations in that realm of how we can make things better in the public realm. And they also offered a form for you to sign and send to your MLA. But I think really it's all of us working together to make sure that we're doing the best that we can. Our legislation right now is based on best practices where it should be highest standards. Right now, if a company comes and says, sorry, Yukon government, we can't afford that best practice, so this is going to be the best practice that we're bringing forward. That's not an acceptable way anymore. We need to do better.
I guess for me, I just try to put it in perspective of, look at how much abandoned mines we already have in Yukon that we are paying for, well, excluding 2 of them, because they're federally. But that being said, with all the new mining projects that are coming into play, are we going to be able to afford that? As a taxpayer, our taxes are going to go up if more mining companies decide to abandon their projects. So I'd just like to flag that. And as Yukoners, we're all paying for it, abandoned mines. So I'd just like to say that, and also be involved if there's an area of interest that that is important to you. Be involved in all the steps and all the processes that it comes into play. Yes, water board, writing to the First Nation. Like there's other ways you can be involved. And also I would like to flag like the new mineral legislation that's coming into play. So be a part of that, be involved. We need to do things better, especially for the next generation that's coming. There's going to be nothing left for them. And I just feel like, you know, we need to do it sustainably and think about the future and our grandkids. We got to leave something for them to mine too.
Yeah, I was just gonna, you know, because I think the question was about what could Yukoners do, and NND has been calling from the very start for a public inquiry on this, on what happened in this project. Now, I outlined today some of the government failures that happened. Why did those government failures happen? The Independent Review Board, in their report, identified that they didn't have time to look into these kind of systemic issues. And they also identified that they did not have the authority to compel people to talk about how we got here. A public inquiry is one of the few methods that could compel people to speak. I have heard from lots of people, not just in the last year, but in the last 10 years, about what happened on this project and how we got to where we are. Those things were not in my presentation today, but those are the things that a public inquiry could compel. Those are the things the public needs to hear about. Those are the things that need to lead to the sea change in government. So if I can say there is one thing that the public needs to do, it is to ensure that we get a public inquiry on how we landed where we did with this project.
And not only have the public inquiry, but we need to action it. The public inquiry is going to take time and it's going to cost money, and we need changes to come out of it.
I think that's a great note to leave us at for today. Thank you everyone for coming. Huge Mussi Cho to everyone online. Today is just step one of 2 days of really critical conversations that NND is hosting. So tomorrow we will be talking about Yukon court cases and Yukon mining. We're going to be talking about metallic minerals, Michelle Creek, and other relevant court cases that have affected mining in the Yukon. We'll also be giving an overview of the NND mining policy. We are at capacity for in-person. We've had overwhelming interest in these events, and we're really grateful for everyone that has been able to make it out and join us online. So if you haven't already registered, if you haven't shared with your team, please share. There's a link to register on the Facebook event and also at nndfn.com. Please reach out to NND in any way, and we'll support sharing the link. But huge Mussi Cho to Mark, Bill, Chief Hope, Helaina, Farzad, Lisa, and Mike online. This has been a really important discussion.